In the heart of a forgotten land, where no roads dared to tread and no map claimed dominion, there stood a forest older than time. Its trees, gnarled and towering, twisted toward the heavens like the fingers of ancient gods reaching for lost memories. Wind did not pass through these woods as it did in other places. It whispered. And what it whispered was not meant for all ears. The leaves shivered with secrets, and the roots pulsed with stories buried deep in the marrow of the earth. Travelers called it the thrice-nine forest, a name passed down through hushed lips around smoky fires. A forest where time bent and paths moved, and if you entered with fear in your heart, you might never find your way back. The villagers at its edge hung iron charms at their doors. They left offerings, bread, salt, and milk, upon mossy stumps and hollow stones, not because they believed they claimed, but because why risk angering what might still be watching? And at the very center of this forest, beyond the meadows where the sun dared not reach, past the skeletal pines that drank moonlight, stood a hut. Perched high upon two great chicken legs, feathered and knotted with age, the hut danced in slow circles, never resting in one place for long. Its windows blinked like eyes. Its chimney exhaled the smell of earth, bone, and old herbs. It was not a house in the human sense. It was alive. It watched. It waited. This hut had a mistress, or perhaps the hut was her. They called her many names: Bone Mother, Wild Hag, Forest Witch, but most knew her only by one: Baba Yaga. To some, she was a monster, a cannibal who devoured lost children and foolish men. To others, she was a keeper of ancient knowledge, a gatekeeper to the other world, a mother of riddles and pain, a mentor wrapped in shadows. Her image flickered, sometimes old and withered, other times young and sharp-eyed, lips curled with knowing. She was not one thing, she was many. Yet behind the tales and warnings, behind the childish fears and twisted stories, there was a deeper truth. Long before she became a monster in the mouths of men, she was something else entirely. A goddess, a protector, a teacher, exiled from memory, banished into shadow. Her story is not just one of folklore, it is a mirror, of power lost and reclaimed, of the wild woman buried in the bones of civilization, of what happens when wisdom is feared and the feminine divine is hunted. And so our tale begins not with a hero, nor a monster, but with a question. What do we do with the women we cannot control? There was once a girl who dared to seek the answer. She lived on the edge of that very forest, in a village that had long forgotten its own soul. Her name was whispered by the elders with pity and scorn, for she was unlike the others, too quiet, too strange. Her mother had died when she was small. Her stepmother, cruel and suspicious, called her cursed. Her father, a pale shadow of a man, watched her with the distant eyes of someone who had already buried hope. But the girl was not cursed. She was called. At night, she dreamed of roots winding around her ankles, of strange lights dancing in the trees, of a voice, dry as leaves and deep as thunder, humming lullabies in a language she did not know, yet somehow understood. She would wake with the taste of ash on her tongue, her heart racing like prey. She was not afraid, not exactly. She was drawn. One morning, as the village prepared for a winter harsher than most, the stepmother sent the girl into the forest with a cruel command. "Bring back fire," she said, "from the hut that walks." The villagers gasped, but none intervened. Everyone knew what this meant. It was a death sentence veiled in a task. A girl sent to beg for flame from Baba Yaga herself. No one returned from such a journey. But the girl, eyes wide and shoulders square, did not weep. She did not plead. She stepped into the trees as though she had always belonged there. As she walked deeper, the forest shifted. The birds fell silent. The sun dimmed behind clouds that had not been there before. Her breath clouded the air, though it was not cold. Shadows flickered at the corners of her eyes. Shapes moved between trunks, yet none touched her. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to recognize her. Trees leaned down as though listening. Mushrooms glowed faintly at her feet. A fox crossed her path and bowed its head before vanishing. She did not know it yet, but the forest remembered her blood. In her pocket, she carried a small doll sewn by her mother long ago. It had no mouth, but its eyes were wide and knowing. Her mother had whispered to it as she sewed, "This is for when the time comes." Now the time had come, and somewhere far ahead, the hut creaked on its legs and turned. Baba Yaga had noticed. This is the tale of the girl and the goddess, of a journey into the wild unknown, where nothing is what it seems, and every step is a test. It is a story older than stories, passed down in bone, memory, and dream. A story about the exile of the sacred feminine and what it takes to reclaim it. So step carefully, dear listener. The path you're on is not marked, and once you begin, you may not return the same. She was born in silence, not the quiet of peace, but the quiet of absence, of something missing that should have been there. Her mother had screamed in labor under the bleeding moon, and the village midwives whispered that such a birth was an omen. A storm rolled in the moment the child emerged, and all the dogs in the village howled in unison. Her mother died before she ever opened her eyes. The girl's name was Vasilisa, named not for beauty, as the name might suggest, but for her grandmother, a woman who once read stars in bowls of water and spoke to crows as equals. Her mother's last wish was to pass that name on, as if she had known that her daughter, too, would walk the path between two worlds. Her father was a carpenter, a good man by most accounts, but too soft, too grieving. He raised Vasilisa for 7 years, during which he spoke little and drank much. He carved toys for her but rarely smiled. When he remarried, the woman he brought home had 2 daughters of her own and a face like a knife, sharp, cold, and cruel. The new wife saw Vasilisa not as a child but as a threat, too quiet, too clever, and worst of all, too strange. She caught Vasilisa talking to birds, saw her staring into the fire for hours, heard her humming old lullabies no one had taught her. "This one is wrong," she whispered to her daughters. "Not like us, something's in her, something wild." They tried to beat it out of her, not with fists but with scorn, with chores, with endless burdens. She became their servant, fetching water, chopping wood, scrubbing floors. Her hands grew rough before her 10th year and her eyes held the weight of someone much older. And yet she never broke, because she had the doll. It was small, no taller than her hand, and made of cloth and thread. Her mother had sewn it the day before her death. "Keep this close," her grandmother had whispered, "and feed it when you are hungry with fear. It will guide you when all else is dark." So Vasilisa did. Every night she placed a crumb of bread near its mouthless face and whispered her secrets into its thread-stuffed chest. She never told anyone, not even her father. The doll never spoke, but she always felt it listened. As the years passed, Vasilisa grew, not into beauty as tales so often command, but into presence. Her silence became a force, her gaze unnerving. People began to cross the road when she passed. Children did not play near her. Even animals treated her with wary reverence. Cats followed her, and crows gathered when she sat alone. The villagers whispered that she was touched by the old spirits, the ones who had been driven into the woods long ago. The forest knew her name, and the forest was waking. The call to adventure did not come with fanfare or revelation. It came with cruelty. One winter, the firewood ran low. The nights grew longer and the wind howled like wolves clawing at the windows. The stepmother's face tightened with contempt as she stared at Vasilisa, huddled by the hearth. "You want warmth," she sneered. "Then go and fetch fire from the hut that walks. Go to Baba Yaga. Perhaps she will feed you before she eats you." Her sisters laughed, brittle and shrill, but her father said nothing. He stared into the empty fire pit and spoke no words of protest. So Vasilisa wrapped herself in her mother's old shawl, slipped the doll into her pocket, and stepped into the forest without another word. She did not weep. She did not plead. She only listened to the soft crackle of snow beneath her boots, to the wind curling through the trees, and to the faint hum of the doll against her chest. The journey had begun. The deeper she went, the stranger the world became. The trees whispered her name, not with malice but with memory. The moss beneath her feet pulsed with ancient warmth. Animals peered from the shadows, not with fear but with recognition. And always there was the feeling of being watched, not by one thing but by everything. The forest itself seemed alive, aware. 3 times she tried to turn back. 3 times the path behind her had changed. Trees that had not been there before now stood in her way. The way forward was clear, the way back gone, and so she walked on. That night she built a fire and huddled beside it. She fed the doll a crumb of rye bread and whispered, "I am afraid." And though the doll did not move, her fear softened, just a little. In her dreams she saw a figure, a woman with wild hair, one eye aflame and the other a frozen river. She sat on a throne of bones and wept without sound. Around her danced lights, small and flickering like the souls of children. The woman did not speak, she only watched. When Vasilisa awoke, her hands smelled of iron and smoke. By the 3rd day she came to the clearing. It did not look like the legends. There were no flames, no screams, only silence. The hut stood before her, tall and strange, its chicken legs rooted into the ground like tree trunks. Its windows blinked. Its door creaked open, not in welcome but in challenge. She stepped forward, and the moment her foot touched the threshold, the wind stopped. The forest fell silent, and the door closed behind her. Inside, the air was thick with scents, dried herbs, candle wax, something older like time boiled down to tar. Strange objects hung from the rafters, bones strung like beads, jars of glowing eyes, feathers dipped in ink. A cat with smoke-colored fur watched her from the shadows, and then she appeared, Baba Yaga. She was taller than any woman Vasilisa had seen, hunched yet imposing, her hair falling in tangled rivers around her shoulders. Her eyes glowed amber. Her fingers were long and stained with ash. "You brought no gift," she said, voice like grinding stones. "Only your soft feet and your soft heart." Vasilisa said nothing, but her hand tightened around the doll. Baba Yaga narrowed her eyes. You've brought the old magic with you. Clever girl." Instead of devouring her, the witch gave her a task. Clean the house, sort the bones, separate the poppy seeds from the ash. By sunrise, fail and you'll be dinner. And with that she vanished into smoke. Vasilisa stood alone. The tasks were impossible. The seeds were countless, the ash choking. The bones whispered secrets as she touched them. Time bent. Her hands trembled. She whispered to the doll, and in the blink of an eye, the tasks began to complete themselves. By morning, the house was clean, the seeds sorted, the bones silent. When Baba Yaga returned, she did not praise her, she only watched. "You have help," she said. "Old help, your bloodline is not weak." Then she handed her a skull. A fire burned within it. "Take this, it will give you light, but it will also show you what must be burned." As Vasilisa turned to leave, the forest shifted again. The trees bowed. The wind sang. She was no longer a girl lost in the woods. She was a girl who had been tested and had passed. What she would do with the flame, that remained to be seen. But something inside her had awakened. Not just courage, not just strength, memory. She was not merely the daughter of a dead woman. She was descended from a line of witches, of wisdom keepers, of forest queens cast into shadow. And the fire she carried now was not just warmth. It was truth. And truth, once seen, cannot be forgotten. Vasilisa's first steps beyond Baba Yaga's hut were tentative, as if she still feared the earth itself might betray her. The skull of fire hovered before her, its flickering flame casting long, dancing shadows. She held it aloft, and the forest answered, its darkness parting in wavering curtains of moonlight. Ahead lay a grove of trees whose roots writhed like serpents across the ground. Their bark was black as smoldering coal, and between their trunks the air shimmered with a faint, iridescent glow. This was the Garden of Shifting Roots, so named because no path within it stayed the same for 2 heartbeats. One step forward might reveal a clear trail, the next, a wall of thorns or a yawning chasm. Baba Yaga's skull bore an incantation. In its flame lived the names of every spirit bound to this place. To walk without falter, Vasilisa would have to call them by their true names. But their names were memory itself, fragments of old songs, words that had fallen from human tongues centuries ago. She stepped into the grove. Instantly the earth convulsed and roots rose to bar her way. She whispered into the fire, "O mother of the greenwood whose bones feed the soil, I know your name." The flame flared bright and the roots recoiled. Vasilisa pressed on, murmuring names she did not yet know, names that stirred her own blood. Morozko, Chertog, Slavic. Each time the roots shivered, twisting aside. By dawn she reached the heart of the grove, where an ancient oak stood crowned with icicles. Beneath it lay her first talisman, a shard of translucent green glass gleaming like an eye. She plucked it from the snow-whitened grass, and the skull's flame danced with approval. In that moment, she felt the first seed of her own power stir, an echo of the goddess that had once been. Beyond the grove, the skull guided Vasilisa to a river whose water gleamed with silver but burned like acid to the touch. It was the river of broken promises, a place where vows made in passion or fear had coagulated into malice, twisting the stream into a trap. Every promise betrayed by mortal lips wove itself through the currents, snaring travelers in illusions. Voices calling a lost child's name, the laughter of a long-gone lover, the soft whisper of a mother's lullaby. To cross, Vasilisa had to confront her own deceptions. In her pocket lay the doll, her solitary truth and companion. She drew it out and spoke, "I vow to be honest, to follow the voice of my heart, even when it trembles." The flame in the skull pulsed, and she cast it into the river. The water hissed, then swirled in eddies of steam. From the depths rose shapes clad in memories, her stepmother's sneer, her sister's laughter, the hollow eyes of her absent mother. They pressed against her, claws of regret and bitterness tearing at her cloak. But Vasilisa did not waver. She pressed the glass shard to her heart and chanted the names whispered to her in the grove. The ghostly forms shrieked and dissolved into mist. The river stilled, its water cooling to a gentle, silvery flow. Vasilisa reached the far bank, soaked but unbroken. As she did, the skull's flame coalesced into a small, living ember that settled above her palm, a promise unbroken and kept. Further on lay a field of broken mirrors, shards embedded in the ground, reflecting every star in the sky and every doubt in Vasilisa's soul. This was the maze of midnight mirrors, where travelers saw not only themselves but infinite versions of themselves, triumphant and fallen, joyous and despairing. To find the exit, she would have to choose which reflection was her true self. At the entrance stood a guardian of glass, an ethereal figure whose face was faceted into a dozen reflections. Its voice was many-voiced. "Choose, child of two mothers. Which of these are you?" Vasilisa stepped inside, her heart pounding. Each shard showed her an image, a fearless warrior woman, sword raised, a grieving orphan weeping, a cold queen ruling with absolute authority, a nameless beggar begging scraps. Over and over she hesitated, pulled by fleeting desires and ancient wounds. Then she remembered the skull's ember, the green shard of glass, the whispered names of the forest. And most of all, she remembered the doll's silent presence, the truth she carried in her thread-stuffed chest. She knelt among the shards and closed her eyes. "I am not one thing," she whispered. "I am the song of my lineage, the memory of mothers, the fire of my own soul." When she opened her eyes, the mirrors shattered inward, crushing the ghostly guardian into splinters. The way forward lay clear, a corridor of unbroken reflections that showed only her journey, the grove, the river, the hut. Passing through, she emerged at the foot of a snow-clad hill. At the summit of the hill stood a crumbling temple, its pillars wrapped in black vines. This was the hall of hungry shadows, where regrets long buried rose to devour the living. The shadows took shape of faces Vasilisa knew, her father's sorrowful gaze, her stepmother's scornful smile, her sister's laughter, but hollowed out, echoing only emptiness. Vasilisa entered, feeling the chill seep into her bones. The shadows crept along the walls, their touch like ice. They whispered of her failures, how she had not saved her mother, how she had failed to protect her father, how she dared to hope for power when no one had given it to her. She clutched the surviving ember of fire. "You are lies," she said. "My regrets are yours, not mine." She held the flame high. It roared, engulfing the shadows in golden light. They writhed, screaming, until they were nothing but soot upon the floor. At the center of the hall lay another talisman, a silver comb adorned with moonstones. When Vasilisa touched it, she felt the memories of the women before her. Her grandmother combing the stars from her hair, her mother weaving dreams into lullabies. The comb was not just a tool. It was a reminder that beauty and wisdom were not lost but passed down, strand by strand. Descending the hill, Vasilisa found a ravaged glade where no plant grew and no creature stirred. In its center was a pedestal, and upon it sat a bird, its feathers half-grown, half-rotted, its eyes vast voids of hunger. This was the bird of endless hunger, a creature born of famine and greed, sustained by the fear of all who starved. It spoke in a voice of cracked earth, "Feed me, child of two worlds, or be consumed." Vasilisa searched her satchel. She had no food, no provisions. The forest had given her only the talismans and the doll. But hunger was not just of the belly, it was of the soul. She opened her hand and revealed the ember of fire. "I feed you my fear, my doubt, my sorrow," she said. The ember flared, filling the glade with fierce light. The bird shrieked, its beak snapping shut. Wings of flame unfurled, and in a torrent of sparks it became a phoenix of pure white plumage. It circled Vasilisa, dropping a single feather at her feet. The feather sang of renewal, of cycles unending, a promise that even hunger could be transformed. She tucked the feather into her hair, feeling its warmth pulse against her temple. Before the sun set, the skull guided Vasilisa to a clearing ringed by ancient stones, an abandoned circle where old gods once met. Now their altars lay broken, their voices silent. But as dusk fell, the stones glowed with runes of longing, and the air filled with whispers. The names of deities erased by time, Jiva, Makash, Jarillo. One by one, the phantom forms of these gods appeared, battered by exile, their power dimmed. They pleaded, "Remember us, restore us. We were the mothers and fathers of your world." Vasilisa felt the weight of their words. She had not sought to revive forgotten deities, but she understood then that her journey was not merely personal. It was a reclamation of all that had been lost. She placed the glass shard, the moonstone comb, the phoenix feather, and the ember of fire at the center of the circle. Closing her eyes, she whispered the old names as if they were lullabies. Jiva, Makash, Jarillo, a wind rose, circling the stones. Light flared from each talisman, weaving into a tapestry of shimmering energy. The phantom gods' forms solidified, their eyes brightened, and for a moment they stood before her, resurrected in myth and memory. They bowed, and in their bowed crowns lay new understanding, that the sacred feminine and masculine needed not dominion but remembrance. They placed their gifts upon her, a cloak of star-spun silk that shielded her from malice, and a staff carved from an oak branch touched by lightning, an emblem of transformation. As night deepened, the skull led Vasilisa back to Baba Yaga's hut. But this time, the purpose was not to beg or to bargain. She was to confront the very spirit that had been exiled into the hag. The true form of Baba Yaga, the goddess of the forest, once revered and then cast out by fearful mortals. Inside the hut the crone awaited, seated upon the bone throne. Her eyes gleamed with recognition. "You have come," she rasped. "But do you know what you seek?" Vasilisa raised the phoenix feather. "I seek the truth of who you are and who I am." The crone laughed, a sound like wood cracking in frost. She stood, her form shifting, bones creaking, flesh melting into light and shadow. Before Vasilisa stood a luminous figure, wings of branches unfurling, hair woven of vines and blossoms, eyes like molten gold. "I am all that you have remembered," the goddess said, "and all that you have forgotten." Vasilisa trembled. She recognized in that form the whispers of her dreams, the memory in the glass shard, the song in the ember. She fell to her knees and wept not for sorrow but for release. "I am your daughter," she whispered. The goddess reached down, touching Vasilisa's brow. A warmth surged through her, knitting together every trial, every talisman, every spark of power. She understood in that instant that her journey had always been one path, to reclaim the divine spark within herself and within the earth. When dawn broke, Vasilisa emerged from the hut not as a frightened girl, but as a bearer of new myth. Her cloak trailed starlight. Her staff glowed with life. The doll lay discarded at her feet, its purpose fulfilled. She walked into the forest and the trees bowed. The birds sang new songs. The earth hummed with the pulse of renewed magic. She had passed every trial not by strength alone, but by remembering who she was, a living bridge between mortals and gods, between fear and wisdom. At the edge of the woods she paused. The village lay silent, still bound by superstition. In her hand the skull's ember strained to live. She had the power now not merely to fetch fire but to ignite hope, but that would be another tale. Vasilisa stood at the forest's edge as dawn's first light trembled through skeletal branches. In her hand, the staff of oak lightning pulsed with a heartbeat of its own, and at her back trailed the cloak of star-spun silk gifted by the revived gods. Yet in her chest, a tempest roiled, a fierce anticipation that this final ordeal would demand everything she had become. Behind her, the world she knew, her scorched hearth, her shattered childhood, receded. Ahead lay the deep heart of the thrice-nine forest, where reality bent most dangerously, and where time itself could turn against the unwary. It was here that Baba Yaga's last test awaited, a reckoning not only of mortal courage, but of the cosmic balance between fear and freedom. From the shadows, the goddess of exile emerged, her form shifting between temperate grace and monstrous grotesque. One moment she was the luminous forest queen, the next the crone of bones. Her single amber eye bore into Vasilisa's soul. "Child of two mothers," she whispered, voice echoing like wind through hollow logs, "you have claimed many talismans, proof of your power and heritage. But are you ready to claim your destiny?" Vasilisa lifted her chin. "I carry their memories, their wisdom, and the truth of this land. I will face whatever comes." A single nod and the forest sighed. The air shimmered, and Vasilisa found herself at the threshold of a vast clearing. Before her stood a circular pool of liquid iron, its surface as black and smooth as obsidian. The forest's edge burned with emerald fire. This was the mirror of worlds, the place where the boundary between life and death, past and future, dreams and waking collapsed. Baba Yaga stepped forward. "Look and be judged." Vasilisa peered into the pool. At first she saw only her reflection, her determined face framed by raven hair, eyes alight with power. Then the surface rippled and the images changed. She watched herself as an infant cradled by her dying mother, the lullaby unspoken but felt. She saw her father's broken silhouette, mourning in silence. She saw her stepmother's cruelty, her sister's sneers, her own tears. She saw her awakening in the grove, the river's acid burn, the phoenix's rebirth, the circle of gods. And finally, the pool showed something new, a world in which she never came, where Baba Yaga remained a nameless witch. The forest fell to axes, the old magic died, and humanity's heart grew stone cold. The vision fractured her, grief for what was lost, fear for what might be, and guilt for every step she had taken. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I came to reclaim what was stolen, to restore balance." When she opened them, the pool lay still. The reflection had shifted, not her image, but the world as she chose to make it, lush, alive, humming with magic and compassion. Baba Yaga's laughter, soft yet terrible, echoed. To choose life over oblivion, that is the true measure of the soul. At her words, the emerald fire along the forest's rim leapt into motion. Flames coalesced into dancing figures, spirits of the old world, neither wholly benevolent nor malevolent. They moved like a frenzied court, some mocking, some beckoning, all testing her resolve. Vasilisa raised the oak staff. From its tip burst a filament of silver light. She wove through the dancing flames, each step a pattern of courage and grace. The spirits lunged with fingernails of fire and voices of doubt. "You cannot hold power and mercy. The forest demands sacrifice." Heritage is a chain, not a gift. She responded not with words but with her presence, steadfast, compassionate, unyielding. The phoenix feather at her brow glowed like a beacon. Each doubtful spirit struck the feather, and where they touched, the flame turned from searing red to gentle gold. One by one, they bowed and dissipated into motes of light. At the clearing's center, the mirror pool shimmered. From its depths, a pillar of emerald flame shot upward, illuminating the goddess. The crone's form quivered between death and rebirth. "Now," Baba Yaga intoned, "embrace your inheritance or bury it forever." Vasilisa approached the pillar. Within its depths she perceived two possibilities: to accept the full mantle of the goddess, to become the living heart of the forest, unchallenged and alone, powerful, eternal, but forever bound to its shadows; to remain mortal, a guardian and messenger, bridging the human world and the divine, vulnerable yet free to shape her own fate and inspire others. Her heart thundered. She recalled her mother's lullaby, her grandmother's starlit tales, her own journey through trials. She felt the ember's warmth, the comb's moonlight, the glass shard's clarity, the phoenix feather's renewal, the staff's crackle of power. She closed her eyes and whispered, "I choose both." The words seemed absurd. How could one claim godhood and mortality at once? But as they left her lips, the forest quaked. The pillar of flame fractured. From its shards emerged a third path, the sacred union of mortal and divine, the goddess in exile, reborn not as solitary deity, but as living myth, enfleshed in human compassion and cosmic wisdom. Baba Yaga's eyes softened. Her voice held awe. "You have chosen the impossible. You have woven the worlds together." With that declaration, the hut on chicken legs appeared at the clearing's perimeter, their final witness. Its door swung open, and from within poured the memories of countless travelers, their hopes and horrors imprinted on its timbers. The hut shuddered, its bones creaking in protest. Vasilisa advanced. She raised her staff and touched the doorframe. Light spread across the wood, knitting together splintered beams and sealing cracks with luminous runes. The memories flared, releasing their hold. Nightmares unraveled, ancient pain dissolved, and flickers of unintended joy remained. At her touch, the hut transformed. No longer a menace, it became a sanctuary, a home for stories, a temple of remembrance. Its legs softened into roots that intertwined with the earth. Its windows became portals of memory, showing both sorrow and hope. Baba Yaga watched in silent reverence. Then she spoke, voice now both crone and goddess. "The exile is ended." Vasilisa laid her palm over her heart, and the story is reborn. Even as the hut healed, a final challenge rose, the collective shadow of fear from the mortal world, summoned by centuries of superstition and cruelty. A wave of darkness swept across the clearing, extinguishing the stars in her cloak and rattling the staff. Vasilisa stood firm. She summoned the green glass shard, raised it high, and let its facets catch the last light of dawn. A prism of colors erupted: emerald, ruby, sapphire, splitting the darkness into a spectrum of hope. From the fractured shadows emerged the faces of villagers, her father teary-eyed, her stepmother grim yet curious, neighbors clutching iron charms. They stood beyond the circle, uncertain. Vasilisa stepped forward, her voice clear as a bell. "Fear is the shackle of the soul. Today I break it." She touched the earth with her staff, and roots of light climbed through the soil toward every trembling heart. In the hush that followed, the villagers felt a stirring. The forest's heartbeat, the old magic's pulse, and the promise that even the smallest spark could ignite transformation. At the edge of the clearing, Baba Yaga, now fully the forest goddess, presented Vasilisa with a final gift: a mask of ebony and silver, carved with the intertwined symbols of death and rebirth, fear and freedom. "Wear this when you walk between worlds," the goddess said, "that you may remember both your mortality and your divinity." Vasilisa accepted it, feeling its weight, light yet infinite. She placed it on her face. Through its eye holes she saw the forest anew, every leaf, every branch, every creature alive with sacred breath. Turning to Baba Yaga, she offered a bow of gratitude. The goddess inclined in return, then melted into a swirl of leaves and moonlight. Her last words drifted, "Go, child of two mothers, become the story that cannot be forgotten." With the climax of her trials complete, Vasilisa emerged into the morning sun, a figure of dual brilliance, mortal and divine. The forest parted before her, opening a path back to the world of men. Yet she hesitated. In her heart she knew, this journey was not an ending but the beginning of a living myth. She began to walk, each step planting seeds of renewal. Mushrooms that glowed with memory, stones that whispered songs, saplings that unfolded into ancient trees. Behind her, the forest sighed in relief, its ancient wounds knitting shut. Far beyond, the village stirred. Doors opened. Eyes peered out. Murmurs rose. Is it real? Can we hope again? Vasilisa did not look back. Instead, she lifted her staff and called upon the power she had forged through trial and choice. A ripple of light swept the land. Wherever it touched, hearts awakened. And somewhere in the deep shadows, the story of Baba Yaga, the true history of a goddess in exile, began to breathe again. The path out of the thrice-nine forest was different from the one Vasilisa had entered. Where once the trees had shifted and the shadows had loomed, now the trunks stood firm and welcoming, their bark etched with new runes of blessing. Moss glowed softly underfoot, and wild flowers, blue bells and moon-pale poppies, bloomed where only brambles had dared before. Vasilisa walked slowly, each footstep a meditation. The staff in her hand hummed with life, resonating with the pulse of the earth. In her cloak of star-spun silk, she felt the weight of starlight resting on her shoulders. Her mask, carved with ebony and silver, sat ready in her satchel. She did not need it yet. Her face was unhidden, open to the world she was returning to. Along the way, she encountered the spirits she had named in the garden of shifting roots. They bowed as she passed, their forms now healed and whole. The ghost voices of broken promises no longer rose from the riverbank. The water flowed clear and musical. The fragments of midnight mirrors lay reassembled, reflecting only truth. Everywhere the world bore the gentle marks of her trials, a landscape transformed by remembrance and choice. Yet transformation was not only in the forest. Vasilisa felt it within herself, a harmony of courage and compassion, a mature wisdom tempered by vulnerability. She was no longer defined by the cruelty of her childhood or the fear that had driven her stepmother's command. She carried instead a living myth, one that would reshape the hearts of those she would meet. The village lay at the forest's fringe, its low wooden houses clustered like wary birds. Smoke curled from chimneys, chickens clucked in muddy yards. Children played along the well-worn paths. From the door of her father's house came a hesitant voice. "Vasilisa," she paused. The name tasted different now, no longer the awkward syllables of a girl exiled, but the proud echo of a heroine returned. Her father stood in the doorway, his shoulders stooped, eyes red-rimmed. He had aged in her absence. Grief had deepened the lines on his face, but hope, long dormant, sparked in his gaze. Beside him, the stepmother and her daughters peered out, their expressions a twisted blend of fear and wonder. Vasilisa approached, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Her father's voice trembled as he spoke. You fetched fire." She knelt before him and placed the skull ember in his palm. It glowed softly, suffusing his weary bones with warmth. Tears slipped from his eyes, and he embraced her, not as the fearful girl he had mourned, but as the bearer of renewal. The stepmother drew back as though struck by something she could not name. Her daughters averted their eyes, ashamed of past cruelty. No words passed between them, none were needed. In that moment, Vasilisa's return was its own revelation. Over the following days, Vasilisa moved through the village like a living dawn. She shared the talismans she had gathered in the trials. The green glass shard, placed at the well's edge, purified the water of bitterness. Villagers who drank from it slept without nightmares and awoke with peaceful hearts. The ember of promise, housed in the church's lantern, burned without fuel, reminding all who saw it that some truths endure beyond fear. The moonstone comb, given to the village's weaver, inspired tapestries of new beauty, threads of blue and silver that sang of hope. The phoenix feather, placed in the schoolhouse, ignited curiosity in children's eyes, reviving songs and stories once forgotten. The cloak of starlight, draped over the village elders' shoulders, brought clarity to council meetings, decisions made with wisdom rather than wrath. The oak lightning staff, entrusted to the carpenter's apprentice, taught hands to shape wood with reverence for life's spark. Each gift was received with awe and gratitude. Fear loosened its grip. Superstitions fell away like dead bark. The villagers began to speak of the forest not as a place of horror, but as a living ally, an extension of their own souls. Not all wounds healed at once. Vasilisa confronted her stepmother at the hearth one evening. The woman sat alone, her sharp face softened by years of guilt. "Why?" she asked, voice cracking. "Why did you send me to die?" Vasilisa paused, remembering the cruelty that had set her on the path. But she had learned that true power lay not in vengeance. She knelt and placed her hand on the woman's. "I needed to remember who I am," she said gently, "and you needed to see that fear as a choice." Her stepmother bowed her head and wept, a release of bitterness and shame. In those tears, both were freed from a story of cruelty. Forgiveness flowed like a spring, healing a wound that had festered for years. As the weeks passed, the village transformed. The field at its center, once trampled and barren, bloomed with a circle of wildflowers, bluebells, moon-pale poppies, and star-shaped orchids. A new gathering place formed around the well, where young and old shared stories of the forest's magic. Vasilisa led them in new rituals, simple acts of remembrance, leaving bread and salt for the forest's guardians, planting saplings in honor of lost mothers, weaving ribbons of moonlight and fire into children's hair. Conflict that once flared over trivial matters now subsided, hearts opened to compassion. Her father resumed his work at the forge, not as a broken man but as a craftsman of hope. He fashioned iron charms not as wards against evil, but as talismans of gratitude, small birds in flight, symbols of renewal. Even the stepmother found purpose. She tended a garden where medicinal herbs thrived, offering healing teas to those in need. The sisters, once cruel, became apprentices of wisdom, learning to read the stars and sing lullabies of old. One evening, as Vasilisa walked alone by the edge of the forest, she reflected on her journey. The moon hung low, and the trees whispered in the language of ancestors. She spoke softly into the night. "I came seeking fire but found memory. I sought to survive but learned to thrive." She remembered the trials, the garden of shifting roots teaching her to speak the language of spirits, the river of broken promises revealing the power of truth, the maze of midnight mirrors showing the unity of her multiplicity, the hall of hungry shadows freeing her from regrets, the bird of endless hunger transforming fear into renewal, the council of forgotten gods reminding her of forgotten alliances, the final choice at the mirror of worlds forging unity between mortal and divine. Each trial had been an invitation to remember the sacred feminine exiled by fear and ignorance. Each talisman a fragment of identity, working in concert to restore balance. In her hand, she held the ebony-silver mask, the embodiment of duality, the reminder that one can be both human and myth. She placed it gently on a moss-covered stump. "Not yet," she whispered, "for there is still work to be done." But soon, in the months that followed, news of the forest's daughter spread beyond the village, carried by merchants and travelers. Tales circulated of a brave girl who had dared Baba Yaga and returned as a bridge between worlds. Some called her a witch, others a saint. When Vasilisa appeared at distant markets, she offered oil to light lanterns, combs to calm troubled sleepers, and feathers to inspire poets. She taught councils to honor the old ways alongside the new, blending practical wisdom with gentle magic. Through her, the memory of Baba Yaga transformed. No longer a figure of terror, the crone became a symbol of wisdom's trials, a necessary reckoning with fear that leads to freedom. Festivals were held at the forest's edge, dances by moonlight, retellings of her journey, offerings of honeyed bread. And when the wind blew through the trees, villagers would smile and say, "She walks among us still, the living myth." Yet not every thread could be woven in a single season. The kingdom's tax collectors still eyed the forest with suspicion, threatening to cut its trees for coin. Vasilisa met him at dawn, offering bread and salt, and a tale of the green glass shard's power. He drank the water from the well and saw visions of regret, then transformed his decree into protection, declaring the forest a sacred preserve. A traveling scholar sought to write her story, but Vasilisa refused to be confined by ink. "Stories live in living hearts," she said, "not just parchment." Instead, she taught the scholar to listen to the trees, to record their whispers as living language. Even the church, wary of magic, welcomed her once its lantern burned without fuel. The priest blessed the flame not as sorcery, but as a testament to faith's enduring spark. Together, they wove new prayers that honored both old gods and the new light. In the end, Vasilisa's greatest triumph was quiet. She did not stand upon mountaintops proclaiming her deeds. She walked humble paths, tending gardens, teaching children to read the language of birds, and reminding her people of the power that lives in memory and choice. On winter's solstice, she returned to Baba Yaga's hut. The roots that once carried the hut upon chicken legs now clasped it gently to the earth. She lit a candle inside, laying the ebony-silver mask on the windowsill. "I remember," she whispered. The forest exhaled in contentment. In her journey, the sacred feminine had been reclaimed from exile, not as a distant deity, but as living myth, breathing through everyday acts of kindness and courage. Dear listener, the tale of Vasilisa and Baba Yaga is more than ancient folklore. It is a mirror for our own exiled truths, the parts of ourselves we fear, the wisdom we silence, and the power we deny. Each trial echoes challenges we face, speaking our true names in a world of shifting paths, reclaiming promises broken by our own doubts, confronting the fragments of self that mirror our regrets, and finding renewal in the ashes of fear. In the end, power is not about dominion, but integration of darkness and light, mortality and divinity, memory and choice. Like Vasilisa, we can step into the forest of our own becoming, claim the talismans of our heritage, and walk back into the world transformed. As you leave this story's embrace, carry its lessons in your own heart. Tend your inner forest, speak your true names, nurture the embers of promise, and weave your own living myth. For the goddess in exile lives within us all, waiting for the moment we say, "I remember." Before us lies the tapestry of Vasilisa's journey, a thread woven through shadow and starlight, through pain transfigured and wisdom reclaimed. Yet this is more than the tale of one girl who bargained with a forest crone. It is the echo of every seeker who has ventured into the unknown, hungry for truth, trembling before the abyss, yet daring to speak their own name. At its heart, the story of Baba Yaga and her daughter unites three truths. Exile is a crucible for transformation. When wisdom is feared, it is cast out. When the feminine divine is driven into myth, it survives in whispers and dreams. Vasilisa's trials remind us that exile is not erasure. It is refined steel, pain and hardship forging the self into something new. The goddess, once revered and then reviled, survives not by power alone, but through the faithful remembrance of those brave enough to honor her. Memory is the true sanctuary. The world we inhabit is shaped by stories we choose to remember or forget. The broken paths of the garden of shifting roots, the acid currents of the river of broken promises, the shattered reflections of the maze of midnight mirrors, all speak to the fractures within us. Yet from those fragments, by naming our fears and reclaiming our histories, we rebuild a sanctuary more enduring than steel or stone. Divinity resides in choice. At the Mirror of Worlds, Vasilisa's final choice transcended binary fate. She wove together mortality and myth, fear and freedom, shadow and light. True divinity is not a heaven-bound crown, but a living dance of paradox, of holding vulnerability and power in one breath. In every offering of kindness, every act of courage, every moment we honor both our scars and our stars, we become mythmakers of our own lives. What parts of yourself have you exiled? Which dreams lie dormant under layers of fear and doubt? And what first step might you take today to call them back into the light? Perhaps it is a word long unsaid. Perhaps it is a journey you have postponed. Perhaps it is a silent promise to tend the embers of your own becoming. Remember, every trial is an invitation, every shadow a doorway, every silence a space where voices once sang. To walk the path of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine is to embrace both the terror of the unknown and the promise it carries. If Vasilisa's journey stirred something within you, carry that spark forward. Share this story with someone who needs its light. Write down the names of the fears you wish to tame. Plant a seed, literal or metaphorical, that honors your own exile, that beckons the wild inside you to awaken. And as you do, remember the hut on chicken legs, the green glass shard, the ember unquenched, the feather of renewal, the staff crackling with possibility. Let these symbols be your companions, the shard of clarity to speak your truth, even when roots twist beneath your feet, the ember of promise to burn away deceit, revealing the purity of your vow, the feather of renewal to remind you that from destruction arises rebirth, the staff of transformation to guide you through every threshold. Wear your mask of duality when you venture between worlds, when you navigate the demands of daily life and the whispers of the soul. In this mask, you are both creator and creation, both human and myth. Baba Yaga remains in the forest's heart, neither wholly benevolent nor cruel, an embodiment of nature's undeniable truth. That growth demands sacrifice, that wisdom arrives in paradox, and that the divine, exiled as it may be, dwells patiently in waiting. When you next feel fears chill or find the path before you shifting once more, recall Vasilisa's footsteps through trials and her final act of union. You too possess an exile's power, the power to remember, to choose, to weave your story into the living myth of the world. Thank you for journeying to the edge of the thrice nine forest. May your heart remain open to the wild, your mind steady in storms, and your spirit ever brave in the face of exile. Are you ready to dance with your own shadows and reclaim your divine spark?